Hello bookworms, I'm Becca and today I'm going to be reviewing Moxie by Jennifer Mathieu. Vivian is known by her family and friends as Dutiful Vivian. With her quiet personality and good grades, she does a pretty good job blending in at her small town Texas high school. But when the sexism at her school reaches an all-time high, Vivian decides to strike back by creating an anonymous zine calling the girls of her school to action. Her zine sparks a revolution as the girls struggle to take back the school, but not without consequences. Now Vivian must decide whether she should stand up for what is right or retreat back to her easy role as Dutiful Vivian. Jennifer Mathieu's writing was absolutely amazing. She developed each character so wonderfully that I felt like even the side characters could have had their own story. They were that complex. I especially loved the family dynamic in the story because for some reason it reminded me slightly of Gilmore Girls. When Vivian's mom was a teenager, she was fairly rebellious, but she moved back home after having Vivian and she patched things up with her parents, and now Vivian has a really great relationship with her grandparents, and it was really nice to see. There's also a pretty decent romance in the story that I definitely was not expecting. Even though I do agree with people saying that the romance was not the main focus of the book, I still think that it took up a pretty hefty chunk of the story. The romance ended up being a little iffy for me, especially because in the very beginning, Vivian was fantasizing about what it would be like to kiss him and hold his hand and sleep with him, and this was before she even knew his name. So it was just this weird objectification of Seth before Vivian even knew him, and in a book that dealt with sexism, it felt very strange and out of place. And for that reason, throughout the book, I feel like I could never fully get on board with the romance because it threw me off so much in the beginning. We're getting so many books lately that deal with deep and difficult topics, and I feel like some of them are really guilty of making it feel like you're watching an after-school special, but this was definitely not the case with Moxie. It felt so relatable and so realistic, not because these things really do happen in high schools and people don't want to talk about it, but it does happen, but also because the story flowed together so well. Jennifer Mathieu did something really interesting in that she used Seth and Vivian's grandparents to introduce different schools of thought. Vivian's grandparents were obviously of an older generation that didn't always fully understand why Vivian was so passionate about what was going on at her school, and then Seth being a guy, it was sometimes hard for him to relate to the things that Vivian was going through. But even though they had these differings of opinions, Vivian didn't shut her grandparents out, and she didn't end things with Seth. They worked through the problems, and I think that that is what made it the most relatable. So I do think that there was a really wonderful theme of communication all throughout this book, which is pretty unique for it being a YA contemporary. I feel like so often in young adult contemporaries especially, communication is not there. People avoid a topic to further the plot along, whereas in Moxie, something happened, the characters talked about it, they resolved the issue, or maybe they didn't, but the plot still moved forward. And that is so true to real life, so that was really interesting to see a book doing that for once, and I think that it's really important for teenagers to read a story where the communication is key. In its essence, Moxie is about a teenage girl finding her voice and standing up for what is right. And in today's society, I cannot think of a more important message, especially for teenage girls and boys. It is important for them to know too, but especially for teenage girls. I wish that I had a book like this when I was growing up, because I think that it definitely would have made an impact on my life. It's no surprise that I gave Moxie by Jennifer Mathieu 5 out of 5 stars. Vivian is tired of being dutiful Vivian, and she's ready to stand up to the sexism occurring at her school. Will the girls at her school be able to band together against this crooked system, or is the school just too corrupt to change? Either way, the boys are about to discover that Moxie girls fight back.